The amount of search and rescue calls that have happened in the last 5 years has exponentially grown to more people getting outside and being in the outdoors and getting themselves into areas and trouble that they were not prepared for. Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Jackie, owner of High Elevation Adventure. Today I really want to talk about something that I think is important for everyone and anyone who is planning an adventure. Whether that's you're going on like a van life road trip or you're climbing a mountain or whatever it may be, I think these are really, really important, especially if you're in the mountains. If you're on a beach, some of these might not apply quite the same. Some of them will, but specifically like mountainous adventures, I really, really want to focus on these 10 important key skills, specifically safety skills that everyone needs to know before they go out on their adventures. So skill numero uno, and this is in no particular order of importance, but I would deem this as probably one of the most important, and it kind of is an umbrella for everything else underneath as well. So number one is mountain preparedness. And there's a lot that goes into this. There's planning for your actual trip, knowing where you're going, being prepared for the weather and things like that, which we'll talk a little bit more about. But one thing you might hear a lot about is something called the 10 essentials. And this is something that is really important anytime you go into the mountains or the backcountry, is to have all your essential gear with you. It may be more than 10, depending on what you're doing. Kind of the standard for what the 10 essentials actually are extra layers, sun protection, so that includes sunscreen, glasses, hat, whatever, a first aid kit, a headlamp, extra water, extra food, navigation, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute too, some kind of multi-tool or repair kit, and fire and shelter. Some of these may be a little bit more applicable than others. Let me tell you what I carry in mine out of those 10. And actually, I am going to do a what's in my pack video coming up soon, so stay tuned for that and I'll go into way more detail. But overall, I do like 8 out of 10 of these. I don't really carry fire or shelter with me if I'm going on a day hike. The reality is usually I'm close enough to home that I'm not worried about it. Secondly, I have an emergency blanket in my first aid kit. So worst case scenario, I can use that emergency blanket to keep me warm if I'm stranded on the mountain overnight and I'm not worried about having to like build myself a shelter. I know how to seek shelter. And a big reason I don't necessarily carry fire with me is because a lot of places I go have fire bans. And so yes, even in an emergency situation, you would be okay to probably light a fire to save your life. If I'm just going for a day hike, I don't feel the need to build a fire to keep warm. My emergency blanket works pretty well. I always have extra layers, and the extra food I tend to bring are like granola bars and things that are already prepackaged that don't need to be cooked. So I don't see anything necessary requiring me to bring fire. And I know what I would do in a survival situation. Really, mountain preparedness comes down to knowing your stuff. Number 2, there is going to be a little bit of overlap with this, but number 2 is to leave no trace. And you may have heard this term before. It's a very important thing that everybody needs to learn. And the reality is this is the thing that I see get violated probably the most when I'm out in the outdoors. What are the leave no trace principles? There are 7 principles. The first one is to plan ahead and prepare. So you want to make sure that you're planning your trip properly. You're preparing for what's going to be at stake. You know what kind of skills you're going to need when you get there. You know what kind of equipment, what kind of gear, all that jazz. So you need to be prepared for where you're going, and you need to plan ahead. A lot of places now require permits because places have gotten so crowded, so you need to be prepared to have to deal with that. Be prepared. The second principle of leave no trace is to travel and camp in durable places. What this means is you need to be really respectful of trail postings, signs, the land that you're on. There are restricted areas for a reason. I see so many people walk on the alpine tundra anytime I go to Rocky Mountain National Park. There are signs posted everywhere that say don't walk on the tundra. There are literal fences blocking you from walking on the tundra that people just like ignore and hop over. There's a reason you're not supposed to walk on the tundra. I live by a nearby ski resort where it is probably the most popular place to see the wildflowers when they bloom in the summer, and a lot of people go take photos there. I try to really reiterate this to other fellow photographers to not take their clients into the wildflowers. It's all protected. It's protected by the Forest Service. There's been a lot of damage over the years from people trampling wildflowers that there's permanent scarring now, and they're trying to replant and they're trying to bring it back to life, and people keep stomping these flowers down. There are literal rope lines that you would have to step over all along the trail, keeping people out of the flowers, and people still ignore them and go trample in the flowers to get their photos. Don't do this. Respect nature. If you're gonna go play in it, you need to learn to respect nature. You're causing permanent damage. Those flowers take years and years and years to grow back, if they ever grow back at all. Nature's delicate. Tundra is delicate. Wildflowers are delicate. There are plenty other places out there that have their own rules and restrictions for a reason. At Yellowstone, there's a lot of really dangerous places off the boardwalks that people will still try to go walk on, and then people get hurt because they're walking on the ground that's 200 degrees Fahrenheit because it's an active volcano. Respect signpostings, respect trails. Please, 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 just be respectful. Travel in durable places. Camp in durable places as well. Number 3 is to dispose of your waste properly. So whatever you pack in, make sure you pack it out. Take all your garbage with you. If you have to go number 2 in the wilderness, you need to pack out your nasty toilet paper. So bring like a Ziploc bag that you can dispose of your waste from. In a lot of areas now, actually, they will give you poop bags where you actually have to carry your excrement out with you as well. If you ever go climb Mount Rainier, this will be required. Know the rules of the area that you're in. If it is okay to leave your leavings, you need to make sure you're digging a hole properly and covering it up, but don't bury your toilet paper just because you think it's made of paper and you think it's biodegradable. You shouldn't leave it. You need to carry it out, okay? Carry all that crap out. No pun intended. Number 4 is leave what you find. I see this a lot. People trying to pick wildflowers in particular. Hawaii, for example, is very, very, very adamant about not taking anything off the islands at all, not just in the national park, but from the islands as a whole. There's a lot of cultural respect towards the gods of the islands that really need to be taken into account, and so there's kind of a mythos that if you take rocks from the island, you're gonna be cursed. Just leave what you find, okay? If you want to collect rocks, or maybe you like to forage for herbs and things like that, there are designated places you can do that, but you need to know the rules of where you are. Pretty much anything that's protected, any sort of Forest Service or forest land, national park, those kind of places are completely protected, and you cannot take things from those places. BLM lands, public lands, you are allowed to forage, but again, you need to make sure you know the rules and regulations of where you're foraging before you go do so. All right, next is minimize campfire impacts. Like I said a little bit earlier, a lot of places I go have a lot of campfire restrictions due to wildfire hazards, and I think it's really important, honestly, to try to just not have campfires if you can help it. It creates a lot of smoke in the air, which is kind of bad for your own lungs, but it also causes damage when you're cutting down trees and you're having to use fire and wood for kindling. You need to try to take into account where you are. If you're going to build a fire, make sure fires are allowed. Buy firewood in advance if you're not backpacking, and bring it with you in your trailer or whatever you're bringing, and have pre-cut firewood that you bought at the store that you're not cutting from the wilderness. Whatever fires you do create, make sure they are out totally and completely, and you crush up any sort of embers, cover it with sand. Try to mitigate the fact that there was ever a fire there in the first place. Just be very, very, very aware of fire danger and what sort of regulations are in place for fire hazards, because certain areas, especially come summertime, they will ban fires completely, and all you can do is have a backpacking stove. So make sure you know where you're going and what the regulations are for fires. All right, number 6 is respect wildlife. Don't be dumb. Don't be one of those people that goes and tries to take a picture with a buffalo or a moose. Those wild animals will kill you. Be respectful of wildlife. Okay, just leave them alone. look from afar. And then last but not least is be considerate of others. People on the trail blasting their speakers. I'm looking at you. All jokes aside though, that's kind of what this rule entails, is be respectful. Some people are in nature to get away from all the noise and the hustle and bustle. So try to be respectful of those around you. There are right-of-ways on the trail. So if you are hiking uphill, you have the right-of-way. So if you're coming downhill, you need to stop and make room for the people coming up if it's a skinny trail. If you are on a shared trail that shares with either horses or mountain bikes or anything like that, people walking have to yield to mountain bikes just because it's a lot easier for us to step off to the side than it is for somebody on a bike. However, everybody yields to horses, whether you're on a bike or on foot. If you're on a horse trail, everyone yields to horses because horses can be easily spooked. And so it's better to just get out of the way, let the horse pass, and then you can keep going. All right, I know that was a really big one. Thank you for bearing with me for that number 2, but leave no trace is really important. Number 3 important safety skill that you need to know is a map and compass. You can have a GPS as well, but I strongly, strongly encourage you to learn how to read a map and use a compass. And the reason is because sometimes the GPS is just a little bit off because it relies on satellite tracking to figure out where you are. For me personally, I learned how to use a map and compass when I was about 12. I think it's easier than using a GPS personally. I carry my little Garmin Mini for emergency situations, and this is my like SOS satellite device if I ever get into trouble and need to call search and rescue, but this is actually not a GPS. It has GPS tracking, but I can't, that screen is tiny. I can't actually do anything on that screen. So you could get a bigger GPS device, but I think it's really important to know how to read an actual map, learn how to read the topo lines, and be able to gauge where you are. It's an incredibly valuable skill, and maybe I'll do a video on this later and kind of teach you guys how to actually use map and compass. If you're interested, comment below and I will make sure to do one because I think it's a good skill. But every map has a little guide that tells you where the approximate magnetic north is in relation to where you are. And so this is a Mount Rainier map, for example. And so in relation to Mount Rainier, where the true north is, and then you adjust your compass to match that, and then you can kind of figure out where you are, and you look at the topo lines and then look at the landscape around you to try to gauge what matches. And it's a skill. It takes practice, and I think it's easier than trying to rely on a GPS in a lot of ways. All right, number 4, weather safety. There is so much that goes into this. I already did a video on weather safety a couple years ago. I need to do an updated one because it's very rambly and unedited. Weather safety is incredibly important, especially if you're in the mountains. It's incredibly important to know your forecast in advance, know how to read the signs of incoming weather, know where you need to be in case of lightning. Weather is a hazard. Weather is dangerous in certain situations, particularly high above tree line. You can get into some serious trouble if a lightning storm approaches. There is kind of a rule among climbers, especially in the Colorado Rockies, that you need to be down below tree line before noon because that's about the time the afternoon thunderstorms roll in, and you do not want to be up high when those thunderstorms happen. I've been up high when that happens. It's scary. All right, number 5, animal safety. Talked about this a little bit in Leave No Trace, but I want to elaborate on it just a little bit more. So Leave No Trace really talked about respecting wildlife, you know, giving them their distance, knowing that they're wild animals. Some of them can hurt you. Please leave them alone. But animal safety really comes down to if you are in a dangerous situation with another animal. Bears, mountain lions, for example. Know your areas that you're going into. There are actually only 4 places in the US that have grizzly bears. Everywhere else is a form of black bear. Doesn't mean black bears aren't dangerous in their own way, but grizzlies are like the scary bear that everyone like associates with as being a more dangerous bear. Knowing how to protect yourself against a black bear versus protecting yourself against a grizzly bear is really important. I could do an entire video on this as well. Animal safety is its own nutshell. If you do go into grizzly country, bear spray is going to be a requirement. Pretty much any national park that's in grizzly country is going to say you are required to carry it on the trail, and they will not let you have permits into the park unless you can prove that you have bear spray. It's not just about carrying this though. You also need to know how to use it. If you pull off this tab and are facing the wrong way, you're gonna spray it in your face and you're gonna have a bad time. Don't do that. Learn how to use your bear spray. There's lots of videos out there about learning how to do bear spray. Some have even been put out by the National Park Service. You can learn how to use it and just hope that you never actually have to. All right, number 6 is about preventing altitude sickness. This is going to be way more pertinent in areas of high altitude, specifically anywhere 3,000 feet higher than you live. You are susceptible to altitude sickness. We see this all the time. I live here in Utah. We'll have people come from sea level out of state to come skiing. They try to go skiing on their very first day here, coming from sea level, trying to jump all the way up to 9,000 feet, and they feel like they're dying. That's a big jump coming from sea level. I have a whole video on preventing altitude sickness. I have a blog post on this. Long story short, there's the 3,000 foot rule, which try not to travel more than 3,000 feet higher than you slept the day before. There's the climb high, sleep low rule, which is climb up high, camp at a lower elevation, and that'll help you acclimatize. Electrolytes are an amazing tool to help you acclimatize quicker and easier. I basically lived off of Gatorade when I trekked to Everest Base Camp and when I did Kilimanjaro. Overall, make sure you're doing anything you can to support your body in the acclimatization process. And everybody's also different. Knowing your limits, knowing what your body can handle and how it acclimatizes takes some practice, but it's important to know. All right, number 7 is knowing your classes and your grades. And no, I'm not talking about school. I'm talking about climbing classes. When you look up trails, sometimes they will say the class it is. You may be wondering what that means. So a trail that is a class 3 or a class 2, what does that mean? I did a whole video on this as well. Go check it out. Basically, it's telling you how hard the trail is. A class 1 is very, very well maintained. Sometimes it's even paved. Anyone can do a class 1. Class 2 may have a teeny bit of scrambling or trail navigation. Class 3 has a lot more scrambling, definitely more trail navigation, maybe more exposure. Class 4 is pretty dangerous. Some ropes may or may not be required. It depends on where you are, and it depends on your comfortability and your own skill set. And then class 5 is literally rock climbing. And then that's when you get into the grades. Anytime you see a climbing route that is labeled like a 5.9 or a 5.10, these are climbing grades. It's telling you how hard the rock climb is at that point. Trail classes, pretty much 1 through 4. Class 5 is when you get into rock climbing. Know what you're getting into is kind of my point. Number 8, risk assessment. I would argue this is probably the most important one. I think it kind of goes into everything, and it really comes down to knowing yourself, knowing your body, knowing your thresholds, knowing your skills and your abilities, and checking your ego at the door. The amount of search and rescue calls that have happened in the last 5 years has exponentially grown to more people getting outside and being in the outdoors and getting themselves into areas and trouble that they were not prepared for. Learning your own personal risk assessment is important. It comes down to how are you going to handle a dangerous situation that you're in, as well as knowing when to turn around and knowing how to truly listen to your gut. I think it's really easy to see a beautiful place on Instagram and think, oh yeah, I totally want to go there. I want to do that and see it. And just because you see it on Instagram doesn't mean you can do it. Not to say that you can't, it may require certain skills that you do not have yet. We're seeing this all the time where people are getting put into dangerous situations because they're unprepared. There have been rescues in Zion National Park for people trying to go in the subway without a rope. This happened in Sedona a couple times where there was a secret spot in Sedona. It got posted all over Instagram, and then people tried to go find this secret spot, but it was like off the edge of a cliff. And people were getting hurt trying to get to it. The only way to get there is with a rope. Find mentors, do your research, get beta on the routes that you're going on, and make sure you know what you're getting yourself into before you go get into it so that you don't find yourselves in those dangerous situations. If you know a trail is going to be more risky or is going to test some of those skill sets and limits that you have, know where your limit is and know how far you're willing to go. All right, number 9 is avalanche safety. And you may think that this only applies during the winter, but it does not. Avalanches can happen in the summer too, especially in areas that are glaciated. And you may also think that this applies to only skiers and snowboarders. It does not. A couple weeks ago, we had 2 hikers end up in a slide here in Utah that weren't carrying avalanche safety gear, and they were lucky they were only partially buried so they could dig themselves out. If they had been buried, nobody would have found them. You need to be aware of avalanche risks and avalanche danger. I think it's really important, whether you're a hiker, snowshoer, backpacker, skier, snowboarder, sledder, whatever, that you learn avalanche safety if you're going anywhere that has any sort of level of snow. You need to know what avalanche terrain looks like. You need to know how to identify it. You need to know if your trails cross avalanche paths. You need to know when it's important to carry avalanche safety gear and how to use it. My biggest piece of advice for this one is go check out the knowbeforeyougo.org free avalanche introductory course. It's going to give you a complete overview of everything I just said in the span of about an hour, and it's free. If you are going to be a lot more serious about winter travel, then it's really important that you eventually take an avalanche certification course, but start here. Little bit of a wardrobe change here. I was editing and realized I completely skipped over number 10. So here you go. Number 10, wilderness first aid. This is a really important skill that anyone going out into the backcountry should know, and you do not have to get specifically certified in wilderness first aid to learn these skills. Some of the skills that wilderness first aid will teach you specifically come down to things that may actually happen out in the wilderness. Learning how to splint a possible broken bone with stuff that's around you, maybe with branches or a trekking pole, things like that. Learning how to treat poison ivy, identifying heat stroke or hypothermia, making sure that you know how to bandage cuts and wounds should they happen, especially if they're bad. Covering anything that can happen in a general first aid situation, but taking it to the outdoors where things are a little bit more rugged and maybe you don't have all the necessary supplies that would be in like an EMT kit, and you got to get creative with what's around you in nature. For example, one thing that is a real creative tool is using a camelback hose as a tourniquet in the event of severe bleeding. Say you need a splint, maybe you've got a bandana in your pack you can make a splint out of. These are just some of the examples of how you can get creative in using what's in your backpack to help in an emergency situation. Going back to mountain preparedness, you should already have some kind of first aid kit, but a basic first aid kit probably isn't going to have everything you need. Those are the kinds of things that wilderness first aid will teach you, and it is an invaluable skill whether you're in the mountains or not. All right, last but not least, I do actually have a couple bonus tips for you. So these are some mountaineering skills that I really recommend you consider if you are looking more into actual mountaineering. If you're like not necessarily into this, then this may not be pertinent to you, but you may find these skills may be helpful. The first thing is really learning how to rock climb. You don't have to go all the time. You don't even necessarily have to go outdoors on a regular basis. Even if you just go to a climbing gym and learn the basics of how to tie your basic figure 8, how to belay somebody. Also just testing your fear on the wall. A lot of people get really scared about going up high and things like that. This can be a really important skill to kind of make you more comfortable with scrambling situations. If you are more serious about mountaineering and alpine climbing, learning how to climb outside and learning some trad climbing can also be an incredibly important skill. Knowing how to talk to and trust climbing partners all comes into one big nice package when it comes to getting outdoors and climbing some big serious mountains. If you plan to climb anything in the Cascades that's glaciated, or maybe on the other side of the world in the Himalayas or in the Alps, you really need to learn Glacier Travel, Crevasse Rescue, and Self-Rescue. These are 3 very, very, very important skills that you will need out on the glacier. Glacier Travel means being roped up together, learning how to be able to keep that distance properly between each other with the ropes, knowing how to tie in between each other, how much length you need, etc. I have a whole video on this as well. Crevasse rescue is done a couple different ways, and it can be done with more people, the better. If you are the only person, knowing how to set up your rope line to save somebody that's stuck in a crevasse is going to be really important. You also need to know how to self-rescue yourself out of a crevasse. So if you ever fall in, you can try to help yourself out. All very important skills if you're going to travel in glaciated areas. And then kind of the last one, and this isn't necessarily mountaineering specific, but learn some survival skills. This can be a really good skill for like thru hikers and backpackers that are on the trail for days and days and days at a time. If you ever run out of food, fire starter, layers or something, like if anything ever happens, knowing how to utilize the land around you, learning which plants are poisonous, learning which bugs are poisonous, all those kinds of things can protect you when you're out in the wild and can make sure that you're not coming home injured or sick, and can really help give you a barrier of protection if you ever end up in a dangerous situation. I know this was a lot of information kind of just thrown all at once. Like I said, on a lot of these, I could make whole videos on each of these 10 safety skills, and on some of them I already have, so make sure you go check those out if you want to learn more. But this is just kind of your brief overview of here's the stuff that's important, everybody needs to know it, and it's important that we are all doing it safely so that nobody gets hurt and nobody's putting other lives in danger. Thank you if you have made it this far. Go ahead and like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.